Today, we're going to talk about a nuclear accident that released more radiation than any other in U.S. history. So why on earth is it a story most of us have never even heard of?
Okay, let's just jump right in. When you think of a major U.S. nuclear incident, what's the first name that pops into your head? For most of us, it's 3 Mile Island, right? It happened back in March of '79 and it caused a global panic. But just 4 months later, a totally different disaster went down at Church Rock, New Mexico. And this one? It was pretty much ignored, even though it released way more radioactive material. So what really happened? And why has this story been so completely buried?
One of these spills became this landmark event, shaping how the public felt about nuclear power for decades to come. The other, despite its absolutely massive scale, just kind of faded into the background, leaving this incredibly toxic legacy for the community it hit the hardest, which was primarily the Navajo Nation.
Well, our story really kicks off at a uranium mill on the morning of July 16, 1979. And what happened next would become the single largest release of radioactive material in the country's history.
It all started right here. At 5:30 in the morning, a tailings dam at the United Nuclear Corporation's mill just failed. A catastrophic failure. A 20-foot hole ripped open, and the toxic gunk inside that disposal pond just began to pour out.
The sheer scale of this is just staggering. We're talking about 94 million gallons of liquid waste. I mean, it's a volume that's almost impossible to even wrap your head around. And it all spilled out in just a matter of hours.
And this stuff wasn't contained. Not at all. The radioactive sludge just surged into the Puerco River, which was the absolute lifeblood for the local Navajo community. This toxic plume then traveled downstream for 80 miles, poisoning the water that people and livestock depended on and seeping deep into the groundwater.
But look, this disaster wasn't just about the sheer volume of the spill. The true danger, the reason it was so incredibly destructive, really lies in the unique and, frankly, aggressive chemistry of the sludge itself.
So here's the crucial point. This wasn't just radioactive water. This was a flood of intensely acidic liquid. With a pH of 1, it was as corrosive as battery acid. And that acidity? It basically acted like a chemical weapon on the entire environment.
And this is where it gets really nasty. Think of it like a chain reaction. The acid didn't just carry its own radioactive material, it actually started dissolving heavy metals that were already settled and locked away in the riverbed. So this process essentially unlocked and mobilized a whole second wave of poisons, allowing them to travel freely with the water, spreading the contamination way farther and deeper into the aquifer than it ever would have otherwise.
Of course, the contamination didn't just stay in the river. It found this really clever and insidious way to get inside the bodies of the people who relied on that water. And it did it by exploiting a little quirk of our own biology.
It all comes down to a case of mistaken identity, right at the molecular level. If you remember the periodic table from school, you'll find the element radium sitting right below calcium. And because their chemical properties are so similar, the human body just can't really tell them apart. This process is actually called molecular mimicry. Your body, which is out there searching for the calcium it needs to build strong bones, accidentally absorbs radium-226 from the contaminated environment, and then it treats this radioactive poison as a building block, incorporating it directly into your bone tissue.
Because of this absolutely terrifying ability to mimic calcium and integrate itself into our skeletons, scientists have a pretty chilling nickname for radium. They call it the bone seeker.
And once it's inside, that's when the real damage begins. The radium atoms start to decay, and they fire off these high-energy alpha particles. Now, outside the body, these particles are easily stopped by our skin. But inside the bone, they act like microscopic cannonballs, just tearing through the delicate bone marrow where our blood cells are made. This kind of cellular destruction can lead to leukemia and other devastating health conditions.
So, while the media's attention moved on pretty quickly, the radioactive threat from the Church Rock spill didn't go anywhere. In fact, it's barely even begun its long, toxic journey through time.
Just let this number sink in for a second. Over 4 decades after the spill, more than 99.9% of the radioactive material that was released is still there, just settled in the Puerco River bed. And the reason for this is the incredibly long half-life of the main element involved, uranium-238.
So the half-life of uranium-238 is 4.5 billion years. That's roughly the age of planet Earth itself. What this means is that the waste from this one event in 1979 will remain dangerously radioactive for a time span that is, well, it's pretty much incomprehensible to the human mind.
This completely transforms the spill from just an environmental disaster into this really profound question of intergenerational justice. The energy and the materials were all for the benefit of one generation, but the toxic consequences have been left for countless future generations to try and manage.
The story of Church Rock really proves that the biggest disaster isn't always the one that makes the biggest headlines. It forces us to ask a really difficult question. How many other critical stories with equally devastating legacies have just been completely buried by silence?